Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Call. Um, just a bit of recap. So, last episode I was talking about some of my experiences at Roma Street. So that's in this Brisbane CBD where I was a student for 3 years. After I became a qualified. So when you do your student program, it was what they call panel, which is basically where you go away to a camp for I think it's 5 nights, 4 nights, and you do some simulated situations. And it was it's quite a daunting prospect, but obviously managed to get through it, and then you become qualified, and then you spend some time pretty quickly after you're qualified. You then become a mentor to students, and it was great being a mentor to students. I loved it. It really kept you sharp. You're going, you know what they're going through. You've only just gone through it yourself, and you can really assist them in their process of learning. Um, while I was, at Rome Street, they were looking for people to go and relieve in Emerald, and so I put my hand up for that, and I went out and did an 8 week stint out at Emerald, and this was back in 2008, and I remember I got there the day before the 2008 floods, so that was a new experience for me, and it was a really good experience of a smaller workload station, the small town and that type of thing. I'd never been to Emerald before. Didn't know what I was, I'd only ever worked really in the CBD, and then obviously done some relieving around the urban areas, urban stations, as a student and things like that. So when I was there, it was a great experience. But it was such a relief to just to slow things down. And I remember at the end of the 8 weeks, towards the end of the 8 weeks, I was on the phone to the wife, and I said to her, yeah, obviously I want to come home for the family and all that sort of stuff, but work wise, I don't want to come back. Like, this is a better way of working. This is there's a good work life balance here, and I really enjoyed it. So she was like, okay. So, and while I was there, before I ended, there became a relief opportunity for officer in charge at Barcaldine. Now, for those that don't know where Barcaldine is, it is 3 hours inland of Emerald, which is 6 hours inland. So in total, it's 6 hours inland from Rockhampton, and it's about an hour's drive from Longreach. A lot of people know where Longreach is. And its closest station is Amarak to the north, which is about 60 k's, and then you've got Blackall to the south, 100 k's, and Longreach, and then between Emerald and uh, Barcaldine, and there's only really a couple of hospital clinics at Alpha and Jericho. So it's a quite a different different lifestyle to what we were used to. And we just took a punt, and we drove out there, and it was a beautiful town. Really loved it, and it was a very different experience. There was a huge geographic coverage area. It was there's no backup. From Longreach, anywhere else is going to take an hour to come and help you. You rely on the fire people. They have auxiliary firefighters that help you out. You rely on each other. You rely on the police, and you've got each other's back. But clinically, there wasn't a lot of backup available. So it was a very uh, confronting part of the job, and it's actually something I recommend to everyone to do for a limited period of time, because it is you don't know what you're capable of until you have to do it on your own. Um, but it's also can be really soul destroying, and its inherent risks, and I'll talk about those more down the track. But it was a different experience. But I remember checking the phones, making sure the phone lines didn't was still working and sending text from the work phone because nobody rang. I wasn't getting jobs. I was there for 3 days before I got a job, and it's like this is just weird. That just didn't happen. Um, so one of the most uh, difficult jobs, I guess you could call it, to deal with was that I did was actually it was I was woken up and oh actually no I lie I wasn't woken up I was at home and it was about 10:30 at night and I got called to one of the many pubs there. There was about 8 pubs there at the time. Population about 1,500 people, but really great place, good friendly place. And it was to an assault with 2 broken legs, 2 broken femurs possibly, and it takes a lot of force to break a femur. So I'm like, holy cow, okay, righto. So we were driving 4-wheel drive troopies at that time, and I go to this pub and there's this gentleman who's sitting on the floor against the wall. And I'm going to try and visually describe how this would look. So imagine you're sitting with your bottom against the wall, sitting upright, your knees are straight out in front of you, but both legs are to 90 degrees and your feet are pointing upwards. Okay, so they're flat on the floor, your legs are flat on the floor, and your feet are pointing upwards. So basically, they're both dislocated. Both his lower legs are dislocated to 90 degrees each, and they're in one line. You know, you could put a ruler against them. They're in one straight line. And it turns out that there wasn't a fight, or sorry, there was a fight, but he wasn't in it. He was bumped and slipped and dislocated both his lower legs. And fortunately, he'd had a bit to drink, and he was in a fair bit of pain, as you would be. But it presented me with a bit of a problem because I couldn't fit him in the ambulance, and I didn't really know how to get him into the ambulance. We've got a single stretcher, and a troopy doesn't leave much room. There's obviously cupboards and things like that, and a chair, and I couldn't get him in. So I'm like, okay, and I remember asking the doctor if he would come out and relocate his legs on scene, and he wasn't willing to do that. So, and these are the days now. Now there's a medical advice line that you can call, where you can call one of our doctors, and they can give you advice and go through things. And obviously you've got telehealth and things like that. So there's a lot more opportunity now to do things that there wasn't available back then. Um, as well as different drugs, but yeah, opportunity to go out of your scope with guidance if and that really wasn't available back at this time. So we ended up having to. The doctor basically said, just do the best you can, and yeah. So I remember we had the police with us. My off-duty colleague was there, and he was helping me out, and that tended to happen if there was a big job. They'd just ring you up and see if you were sober and if you could help, and yeah, he came in and he helped, and essentially we held him back and gave him the pain relief that we had available to us, and we relocated one of his legs. And relocating one was enough for me to be able to fit him in the ambulance with his other leg sticking out, and then took him to hospital. So it was yeah, never experienced that before, and it's not something that we're really trained to do. But single officer is a pretty tough gig, and sometimes you've just got to do the best you can with what you've got and what you've got available. Like I said, times have changed where there's a lot more resources available outside of just your decision making, where you can make phone calls and get guidance and go through how you're going to do particular things, whereas that wasn't available back then. And yeah, I've caught up with that patient after that, and he was good. He was obviously some quite distressing injuries at the time, and they take a while to rehab, but he was all good. After Barcaldine, I went up to Hewenden, which was a couple of hours north of that, and I was there for 18 months. Had some big jobs there, and some pretty memorable jobs. And I'll go into some of those. So one of the ones I remember was I went to a minibus rollover with a group of school kids that were on the way back from a show out west. So they went past us, and they were half an hour out of town or so, and the dispatch was to a rollover with possible multiple ejections, and yeah, and I picked up. So the way we roll with that is generally I'll go and pick up a fire officer, and we'll go out, and then the fire crew will they all get called in, and then they make a crew, and they'll head out, and so we'll get there first, and on the way out I'm going through with the fire officer how we're going to triage. So for those that aren't aware, triage is basically where you're determining the treatment priorities of people, which you have to do in anything where the when the amount of patients exceeds the people we've got on scene, the resources we've got, you have to triage. If you've got multiple patients, you have to triage. And so we've got tags, etc., and we're going through this very rigorously. It's a half an hour drive. It's scary going to those jobs. You're like, shit, what am I going to? There's kids. I didn't know how old. There's limited information coming through. Um, and yeah, we get there, and it's amazing how many times off-duty people are there. Now, bear in mind, we are 3.5 hours inland from Townsville. There's not many big towns around, and I get there, and there are two separate off-duty paramedics on scene already who have just come across this, and we rock up, and everyone is already triaged. Um, that blows you away. You're like, holy cow, your whole thought process is, I was going to do this. Crap, what have I got to do now? Okay, no drama. So you go in, and obviously you've got the tools that off-duty people don't carry many tools with them, as far as like blood pressure cuffs, monitors, etc., etc. Um, and then it's just going around talking to them, finding out, re-triaging, reassessing, sorting, sifting, all that sort of technical stuff, and going from there. And then you've got the issue, and there were a few people ejected. Nobody was seriously hurt. There was a lot of gravel rash, sore backs, sore necks. Nobody seriously injured. Where what we call life-threatening injuries that were obvious at that time, and thankfully that didn't happen. But then you've got the problem of how do we get these people back? I think in total we had 10 people. There was about eight or nine kids, around 15, 16-year olds, and then a teacher. And I remember when I was driving out there, we actually got back to one of we asked the fireys to bring out the other ambulance, because we had a two stretcher ambulance in there as well. So we drive most rural stations are made up of a two stretcher ambulance and a single stretcher. Although that's changed now, there's not too many two stretchers around, but there was back in the day. So I got them to bring out the two stretcher and or the other ambulance. I think I was in the two stretcher, and it just gives you another set of tools. And they came out, and we ended up putting collars on and putting people. It was. I remember one guy who basically had no skin left on his bum. One young fella, we had him lying with a collar, prone, which means face down. Um, we had people in collars sitting in chairs. We had, it wasn't ideal, but you've got to do, you can do the best you can do with the resources you've got in the time you've got. So we took 4 people back in one ambulance. I think we took 2 people back in the other, and then the police took 2 or 3 other people back in theirs, and everyone went to hospital. 4 of them ended up getting flown out for scans, just for, and no one ended up being seriously injured, which is, fantastic. And that was best case scenario. But it was a scary job. And I think being kids, going to a group of kids made it emotionally much worse on the way out. But once you get there, you just do the job, and it's afterwards that you're like, "Holy crap, that could have been awful." Um, but again, the off-duty paramedics, they if they weren't there, it would have been a hell of a lot harder to deal with. They didn't have to stop. And again, I'll talk about this down the track. But you're never truly off duty. You're always helping out. If you come across something, you've got the knowledge and skills. You tend to help out where you can. And these two people will, if they hear this, they'll know who they are, and I have thanked them before, and I thank them again because, they made what could have been a really bad situation less bad for me to deal with, and everything worked out really well in the end, which was excellent. Um, the thing about rural work is that it can take a long time to get to places. I remember one particular case. And it was so I was the officer in charge of Hewenden, and I went out to a job that was about 90 kilometres, 100 kilometres out of town, but it was 100 kilometres of not highway driving, and it took about an hour and a half to get there, um, maybe even a little longer. And it was to an asthma attack, and unfortunately, by the time I got there, I got there, and the husband was cradling his wife, and he said it's too late. She's gone, and he was right. She had passed, and that is gut wrenching. I drove that car as hard as I could safely. I damaged the vehicle. That's how hard I drove it. You've got to get there. There's no point in not getting there or getting there with a broken car where you can't get back. But it was a really sad case. He certainly didn't blame me. He was totally understanding. He knows where he lives, and and it was a real gut punch to feel like you didn't get there fast enough. You could have saved him. Saved her. Sorry, my apologies. And what I do remember about that particular job is because it wasn't an expected death. She there's a process where police have to come and any unexpected death where a police where we're not able to get a cause of death, then the police have to come and just do their thing, and that's fine. It's we're very we explain that to loved ones, and explain that it's not, it's just a matter of it's just the standard procedure. It's not accusing them of anything wrong or anything like that. So I waited a little while for them to turn up. Obviously, it took me a while to get there. It took them a while to get there because they got dispatched after me. Um, and and I think it was only when he said that he told our guys that he thinks she's dead that they got dispatched. So it was probably another 45 minutes waiting for the police to turn up. And then we had the problem. So as a standard thing, we don't transport um, deceased people. That's not our role, and it's not. It's rarely appropriate. But I remember the police officer asking me if he thinks I could take the body back because we went through some pretty rough terrain, and as I said, I did some damage to the car myself, and we knew that the government morticians, or funeral directors, or whatever you want to call them, they were not going to be able to come out. They weren't going to be able to make this to get into this property. Uh, Especially anytime soon. It was going to be a couple of hours, and you don't really want to leave the loved ones there with this body, the deceased body. So I remember, I thought that was an appropriate decision, and I rang up a supervisor, and he said, "No, that's not what we do." And I'm like, "Yeah, no, I understand that's not what we do, but I'm going to do it this time, and because it's appropriate." laid out the situation, and yeah, had a bit of a tit for tat. And he was like, "No, it's not something we do." And I basically said, "Well, we're out in the bush. I'm going to do it anyway. We'll have this conversation after the fact, but I'm letting you know that this is what's happening. I'm telling you. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you that this is what I'm doing." And yeah, so we with the assistance of the husband, we put the body. After the police had done everything they needed to do, we put the body onto the stretcher. He was able to give his wife a kiss, and then I took the body into town for where to put him in the morgue, put her in the morgue, so that the processes could start, and then he could get on with once the police have done what they've got to do, then obviously they can make their own funeral arrangements, etc., etc. So it was one of those things where sometimes community policing, community paramedicine or community service is completely different in the sticks than it is to the city, and sometimes you've got to have the balls to tell the people up the chain who haven't done that's what you've got to. It's not always, you can't always do things by procedure. There's a lot of grey areas. There's a lot of things where sometimes doing the wrong thing might be the right thing, um, within limits, obviously. And yeah, advocating for the people left behind, advocating for the people that are patients, advocating for your community is one of the hardest things you can do when everything else says don't do that, when all the paperwork or the procedures say don't do it. But yeah, it's a really important process, and as sad as that was, it also, I know I did the right thing. um so yeah, community policing, keep I've been listening to the other guys, Schultze and Damo, on Two Ordinary Coppers, and they call it community policing all the time. So sorry about that. Paramedicine, or service, community service is completely different. So and then another from there, I went to Guru, and I was at Guru for a long time, over 13 years. And there was a couple of jobs that stand out there. There was a couple of bad ones. I attended the Home Hill stabbing, where a couple of backpackers were murdered by a French Algerian backpacker. That was a horrible job. Um, Transported that, and it was heart wrenching, and it was sad, and it was one of those jobs you're there to back up your team, you back up your brothers and sisters. In our case, our brothers and sisters in teal, for police, the brothers and sisters in blue, and we're each other's brothers and sisters in these type of jobs as well. So, yeah, that was an awful job. It was There was a couple of jobs, a couple of days I remember. Now Guru again had a very large geographic area. It could take 40 minutes to get to a job, or more. So it's not giving anything away, or I'm not giving any locations away or that sort of thing. But I've had days, on one single day, when I went to somebody who hung themselves and died, and I went from that job to delivering a baby. Um, that is a day that you go home and you're like, holy cow, there's not a lot of people that get exposed to that sort of thing. That the hanging was a middle-aged woman, and the baby was their first baby, and it went really, really well. Um, I've delivered a couple of babies, and I've been very fortunate that they've all gone well. Um, Obviously, mum and that do all the work, and we're just there to make sure that if things go pear shaped, we can intervene where we need to, if we need to. And knowledge of birthing practices has developed a lot over the years. It's still something we don't see enough to be confident in, but women have been birthing a hell of a lot longer than people have been being paramedics. So most of the time, you're just getting towels and catching. Um, So, it's a beautiful process. It's a it's a dirty process for those that have seen it, especially in the pre-hospital environment. My rule used to be, as much as possible, was to please deliver at home or deliver in the hospital. I really don't like you delivering in the car. It's messy, it's smelly, it's dirty. It's just, yeah, it's uncontrolled. Yeah, home is much better. So, delivering a baby at home was really a really nice thing to do. Yeah, and then another sort of job that it sticks in the mind, and it afterwards gave me a bit of a giggle. But it's also tragic at the same time. Not for a human, by the way, and this is often even more upsetting to a lot of people to hear. I got a knock on the door. So when you're the OIC, you often live on the premises of the station. Sometimes it's in a separate building, sometimes it's above. But I got a phone call, or there was people banging on the door down at the station, and I could hear them, and I went over and to see if I could help them at all. And I opened the door, and I don't know how to describe it. It was like the scene out of a zombie apocalypse movie with two zombies covered in blood in front of me. Literally, it was like a vampire, where people explode and stuff like that. I've got these two guys, probably in, I don't know, 40 years old, in around their 40s, two guys that are standing next to me, and they are covered in blood and grass and tissue. And I'm like, what the hell happened? Are you guys okay? And they pointed to me, and they pointed behind them, and so there was cane fields, fully grown cane fields that surround the road in, that was near the station, and their car was nearby. It was about 200 meters away, and unfortunately, a horse came running out of the cane field, and they hit it in this little sort of hatchbacky, smallish car. And this horse had gone onto their bonnet and then through the windscreen, and the windscreen had cut this horse open. And basically, these two had got peppered with horse guts. There's no other way of terming it. And their car was absolutely stuffed, and the horse got up and ran into another cane field, where it would have definitely subsequently died. And I actually had to hose these two guys off because we weren't sure if any of the injuries or the blood or anything like that were theirs. Uh, and it turns out it didn't seem that way. We hosed them off. Luckily, it was in a warmer part of the year. But I was hosing them off in the front yard and hosing the blood off them and the tissue and the guts. And yeah, and we went over, and they were okay. All their obs were fine. They were uninjured, and we went over, and I had a look at their car, and oh yeah, it was just unbelievable how much damage was done inside this car. This thing had exploded. So yeah, it was that was a thing I'll never forget. I honestly thought these guys had been, I don't know, like I said, attacked by zombies or something, and it turns out that they were fortunately totally uninjured, a little bit shocked, and it was it was a bit of a shocking circumstance. Going back to that community policing thing that I was talking about before, one situation that I felt really demonstrates that is, as a solo officer, it's very hard to treat and drive at the same time. And sometimes, if it's something that needs to be on the way quicker than waiting for backup to be there, then, or if town was too busy to send anyone down to drive, as a solo officer, then you sometimes have to rope in fire or police to drive for you. And one particular time I remember I had a police officer driving for me, and that didn't happen very often because obviously they've got their own roles and their own, they're a busy agency in themselves. So I cannot remember the circumstances of this particular time or why they were driving, but they were. And it was at night, and we were going along the Bruce Highway, and in front of us, I'm in the back with the patient, and in front of us there was a car that was. It looked drunk. Yeah, well, not the car, the driver. It was all over the place. It was swerving. It's a 100 kilometre an hour road, and this car is dangerous. And we were like, my goodness, is he distracted? Is he asleep? Is he drunk? Is he on his phone? What is he doing? And we followed him for a little while, and then we were talking to each other and like we got to stop this guy. He's going to kill someone. So the police officer's like, how do you put your lights on? So we've put the lights on, and he's driven up the bum of this guy, and he's pulled him over on the side of the highway. So can you imagine being pulled over by an ambulance? Um, and then this guy has parked, and out of this flashing lights, this ambulance, comes this police officer. And I reckon if the guy was high, he would have just been like, he would have just blown his mind away. So it turns out he was tired. And yeah, I think having a police officer walk from an ambulance woke him up a bit. And he proceeded to drive quickly from there on. Um, it would have been, yeah, potentially a dangerous situation. So it was something you couldn't not do. But again, community policing. There was nothing else around. It was safer to do this. Certainly isn't in any books that we follow. But we pulled this guy over in an ambulance with a police officer, probably giving him the scare of his life. He's probably lucky that obviously we didn't have any RBT type stuff or anything. But yeah, he drove very sensibly from there on inwards, being followed by us. Um, so yeah, maybe we stop something really bad from happening that night. But that's community policing. You do unusual things with your colleagues, and the policing and the fire were really. They were really important in what we do. We couldn't do our jobs without them, and vice versa. There's definitely circumstances where we're both very glad to see each other. It's we do when we're in a bit of violence or whatever, then there's nothing better than seeing those guys turn up. And I guarantee you, when people are sick and injured, they certainly breathe a fresh a bit better when we get there. Badge therapy, we call that. But there's certainly times where you're going to a job and you're almost hoping you're not first on scene, because when you're first on scene, it's a bloody terrifying job. My in that regards, probably one of the biggest jobs I had potentially was an 11-person rollover in the bush out my way, and it was the same thing. It was a rollover but they were with a lot of them were veggie workers, so like overseas backpackers and that type of thing, being shipped around, and they rolled over, and there was a couple of ejections, and I was first on scene. There was no one else there. There was plenty of. It was in a bush road, but there was still quite a few people. And the hardest part when you get to one of those jobs is working out who's a patient and who's not. I've talked before about that triage system. So it's really important that you get around to everyone and identify who's who in the zoo, who's a patient, who's not, who's a bystander. Um, you've got to be quite assertive. You've got to be, everyone wants to help, and everybody wants you to help the loudest person. I remember there was one particular female that she was screaming. She was obviously in a lot of pain, very distressed, and everyone was like, "Go to her, go to her, go to her." But the one thing about when you're screaming is that you're breathing. So that's actually she was actually one of the last people I went to, because you go to the quiet ones first. They're the ones that can potentially be the most life threatening. We had plenty of people coming, but I think I was on my own for about maybe 10, 15 minutes. And it feels like forever. So you've got to triage everyone, which means you're going around to everyone and you're working out who's injured, who's not, who has life-threatening injuries, who does not, and and then not the hardest part is not being stuck on one person. So with a triage, when you're doing triage, it really does change, and the saying becomes greatest good for the greatest number of people, and that can be a really hard thing to do, is to walk away from someone. And there went so there was a couple of people that ended up being chopped out, and the one that was loudest was she was one of those people. And it was one of those interesting ones where I experienced it earlier in my career when I was in the city, and it was a person with a who had been king hit, and he was bilingual, but he would not, and apparently he spoke perfect English. But at this particular time, when I tried to engage with him, he would not speak English at all. He would only engage in his native tongue, and it took a lot. The police at the time, again, this is a long time ago, but they wanted to take him to the watch house, and I was like, no, this isn't sounding right. It's not okay. So we ended up taking him to the hospital, and he did have a brain bleed. And that's something that stuck with me, especially with bilingual people when they go back to their native tongue and they refuse to speak in a second language. Then it can be a real key indicator of a head injury. And this particular patient, the one that was the loudest, she was German, and she would only talk in German, and everyone around her said she spoke perfect English, but she would not engage in English. She wouldn't understand what I was saying in English. She would not engage. So there was a lot of screaming every time I touched her. And when the medical team from the hospital, from the in the chopper landed, one of my suggestions was that she probably had a brain bleed, and that turned out to be the case. Survived, no issues, was treated well, responded well, and no dramas. Um, but they're the little things that medicine and paramedicine are very much it's a career of life experience. It's a career of lessons learnt and lessons taught. You pick up lots of little hints, tricks, experiences along the way that you cannot learn out of a textbook. You cannot learn out of a course. You have to learn it from doing it. You have to learn from making mistakes, or from seeing somebody else's mistakes, or coming across something that you don't know. I would commonly, if I came across a patient that had a disorder, disease, illness. There's a lot of stuff I'd never heard of, and a lot of it you can't even pronounce. But I would ask them about it, and we'd have conversations. Because how do you learn if you don't talk to the patients who are experiencing it? How do you learn? And it's certainly not being invasive or intrusive to them. It's asking from a medical perspective. Teach me how I can look after you if I come across this again. And it really is an important communication is 99% of a paramedic and a police officer's job. The tools and the toys, that's such a small part. The communication and the learned experiences is what makes a good paramedic, a good firefighter, anyone of those care roles, those nursing, doctors, you know, community. And doctors are often are obviously not renowned for their patient care and their communication, but in an ED setting, if you don't ask the right questions, if you don't have the right rapport, you don't get the right information. So having that rapport and that communication is the most vital skill any service people like that can do. Corrections, whatever. If you can't communicate, you're going to find yourself in trouble a lot more than if you can. Uh, there were one of the things that the sayings we used to have, or we still do. You often joke to people, if we don't panic, you don't panic. And I've said that countless times throughout my career. The few things that you try and do when you get to a job, every job you get to, you would try and make the patient laugh. So if you go to old Mrs. Smith and she's laying on the floor, she's had a fall. One of the most common questions or common statements is you'd rock up and it would be, "Oh, did you have too much scotch for breakfast?" And it would just lighten the mood. And 99% of the time, you would get a smile or a laugh from the patient, from the bystanders, or the concerned family. Because when you're on a job, you're not just treating the family, not just treating the patient, you are treating the family and the bystanders. They are all part of the package. And because if you can keep the bystanders cool and calm, then the patients will react to that as well. They feed off the people around them. Um, that's just human nature. So you would make them laugh. And so one of the, as I said, one of the most common things that we would say is, if we're not panicking, you don't need to panic. So, it was just basically, this is just a run of the mill job. We're not panicking. You're all good. But I remember one time, and we said, I've said that, hundreds and hundreds of times in my career. But I remember one time that that I couldn't say that, and that was we were working in a town south of Townsville, and we got I was actually working with another officer that day, and we got called to what we were told was a self-inflicted cut to the neck. Okay, no dramas. So we rock up, and there's this. We go into this room. We go into this house. It's a high set Queenslander. And we go into this house, and this patient comes out of a bedroom walking, and she's got a tea towel around her neck. And I'm thinking, okay, well, don't know what she's done. Don't know what she's expecting, a little paper cut type thing. We've been called to, you get called to all sorts. Paper cut's not unusual, or a scratch. Bit of a cut. People do self harm a lot, but she had this tea towel and she's walking around. She's very calm and she comes out. I said, "Hey, how you going?" And asked her name, and then it's like, "Okay, can you show me what you've done?" And she took a tea towel off from around her neck, and I just went, "Holy fuck!" And it just blurted out, and I was like, "Oh, whoops!" And my partner was like, what? Because he hadn't seen. He was getting opening the bag and getting stuff ready to do obs and whatever. I said, "Have a look at that." And he looked at it and he went, "Holy fuck." And this woman had managed to get a Stanley knife and cut herself from the side of one side of her neck to the other side of the neck, like down where you could see her throat, for want of a better term, without using medical terms. And she just missed her vital vessels and I'm talking by millimeters, like a millimeter. And it was like, holy crap. So we covered her up and we put it, and she started looking upwards and going, what? And you could see everything. It's like, put your head down, and you're trying to put some cover around her throat. And yeah, I remember going to hospital, driving her to hospital, and she's like, "Oh, I forgot to get anything out for dinner." I said, "Oh, you're not going out for dinner. You're going to be transferred, and you're probably going to be put on life support, and you need some serious surgery because what you've done is a life-threatening injury." And she had no idea. She hadn't seen it. She just thought she did it, and then it was bleeding a bit, and she was just a bit concerned. Uh, and self harm is, a very, very serious subject. It is something we go to, or as the QPS, we go to them a lot. But this was pretty full on, and it was the first time, I think, in my career that I remember dropping a swear word just without any filter. It was like, holy shit! I just was not expecting what presented itself in front of me, and I was like, oh my god. So yeah, she ended up being okay. She was intubated when we got her to hospital, and she was sent up for surgery, and yeah, and she recovered. But that was, yeah, when I talk about the that don't panic if we don't panic, That's my one story where I kind of panicked. It didn't feel good for it, but it was in retrospect, it was quite an amusing reaction to something I just was not expecting at the time. So, okay, well, I think I've raffled on. It's been about 45 minutes. So, yeah, I hope people have enjoyed hearing some of the stories. Obviously, some of them are quite graphic and distressing, and that's okay. That is our job. I hope it hasn't triggered anyone. Yeah, it's these are the types of jobs we go to. These are the ones that have stuck out to me. They're not the most distressing jobs. They're just they're stories, and they're often ones that are recounted throughout the career. You have the ones that you recount to people at parties and things like that when people ask you those war stories and things like that. These are some of the ones that I've got. There's obviously countless more. There's more distressing ones. There's ones that have had long term effects on me. And the funny thing is that what I've realised over the last little while, or a couple of years, is that all these jobs have had a cost, but there's different ones that come up at different times, and you bury a lot of them, and you don't even know that they're still in that filing cabinet. But your brain is it's a hugely powerful organ, and it can do some amazing things to both protect you and stuff that can, when you've done wrong by it later on, it can come back and bite you. So yeah. I hope everyone's having a great week. Thank you for tuning in to be on the call. Uh, as previously said, if you have any suggestions or you have any questions or want to come on or want me to cover any certain topics, be on the call Peter at gmail.com. I am going to try and put up a web page, but that's the best way to get me for now. And yeah, everyone stay safe, be kind, and I look forward to chatting soon. Bye.